On Christmas Eve, everything seemed perfect for Marco's proposal, until the strange appearance of a homeless girl under the table. In the blink of an eye, a forbidden kiss exposed a secret that made Marco's girlfriend turn pale. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now subscribe to the channel, and let's get started. Marcus adjusted the collar of his overcoat, trying to conceal the trembling beneath the thin fabric. He was nervous. It wasn't the usual chill of an early evening. Adrenaline coursing through his veins made his palms sweat despite the low temperatures. It was Christmas Eve, and he had decided he couldn't wait any longer. He was ready to take the most important step of his life. In his pocket, he clutched a velvet box containing a diamond ring, hoping it would be the perfect gift, something to remember forever. As he entered the restaurant, a polite waiter greeted him and guided him to a table in the center of the dining room. Not long after, Sophie arrived. Her elegant coat contrasted perfectly with the Christmas decorations. She walked confidently down the central aisle of the restaurant, drawing glances and casually acknowledging those who recognized her. Reaching the table, she gave Marcus a quick, perfunctory kiss, as though too pressed for time for grand gestures of affection. "Finally, huh?" she said, adjusting her sleek, shiny hair. The traffic was awful. Marcus smiled, understanding that it was just her way. Ignoring her slight coldness, he gestured for her to sit. Then, he called the waiter and ordered the finest glass of wine available. She smiled, approving the choice, and leaned back in her chair. While they waited, he reached into his pocket, feeling the small box containing the ring. He would need to find just the right moment to surprise her. The meal unfolded with a festive atmosphere. The restaurant was packed with people, couples embraced, families toasted. Above them hung greenery adorned with small golden bells swaying to the rhythm of the air conditioning. The ambiance was warm, with the gentle hum of conversations occasionally punctuated by bursts of laughter. Marcus enthusiastically talked about his plans for Christmas Day, hinting at a surprise, but Sophie seemed more preoccupied with checking her phone and discussing shopping. Suddenly she lifted her head, frowning. Something had caught her attention. Without saying a word, she leaned slightly to the side and looked at the table next to theirs. The tablecloth trembled slightly. She gestured disapprovingly. "Marcus, I think someone's under that table." Following her gaze, he noticed a thin hand discreetly pulling at the edge of the cloth. Before he could react, Sophie called the waiter and pointed, "Someone strange is under there. They're ruining our Christmas moment. Please remove them." The waiter approached, visibly uncomfortable, and carefully lifted the cloth, revealing a young girl huddled beneath. She had dark skin, small braided hair, and a worn coat that barely kept her warm. Melted snow trickled from the frayed collar, evidence she had spent quite some time out in the cold. Sophie covered her mouth in a mock display of shock. "My goodness! What are you doing here?" Marcus reacted differently. He saw her trembling, her face showing a mix of exhaustion and fear, as though bracing to be thrown out at any moment. "Wait," he said to the waiter. "Don't just kick her out. What's your name? Why are you here?" The girl hesitated, her eyes darting nervously as if unsure whether to explain. She wrung her hands, silently pleading to stay. "My name is Ruth," she murmured almost inaudibly. "I just wanted to warm up. It's so cold, and I have nowhere to go." Sophie rolled her eyes. "Look, I don't want to be insensitive, but this is a fine dining restaurant. It's no place for—" She stopped, noticing some customers starting to pay attention to their conversation. "Well, manager, could you handle this, please?" The manager, now present, appeared flustered. Yes, it was a high-end establishment, but Marcus was willing to pay. He stood to face the manager. "Please let her stay a while to warm up. You don't have to serve her anything, just let her stay until she can figure out where to go." Sophie's frown deepened, her impatience showing, but she pretended to agree. "Of course, darling, we wouldn't want to be cruel, but you know—" She paused strategically. People do take advantage sometimes. Even so, Marcus persisted, and the manager eventually relented. Ruth remained standing, timid and unsure whether to thank them or retreat. Her face betrayed deep embarrassment at being in such a different world. Marcus requested the menu again, intending to buy her some food. Sophie sat in silence, tapping her nails on the table with a small, disapproving smirk. Minutes later, as a waiter brought some food for Ruth, Sophie and Marcus exchanged harsh words. She accused him of ruining the evening, reminding him she had planned something special for the two of them, urging him to focus back on their moment. He, on the other hand, couldn't bear to see someone treated with such coldness, especially on Christmas. Their argument was subdued but didn't go unnoticed by nearby diners. Meanwhile, Ruth tried to keep her distance, visibly uncomfortable. When Ruth finally got a chance to eat, Sophie stood up. She claimed she needed to talk to the girl. With a facade of false generosity, she pulled some money from her purse and approached Ruth, moving a few steps away from Marcus. Scratching her chin, she looked Ruth over from head to toe before speaking in a low voice. "Listen, Ruth, right? Here, take this." She handed her a few bills. "But I need a favor in return." Ruth, startled and grateful for the money, wasn't sure whether to accept. She hadn't eaten in days, and any amount was a lifeline for survival on this freezing night. Sophie pressed her lips into a calculated smile. "It's nothing major. Just, when I signal, you'll kiss my fiancé. Out of nowhere, understand? I'll pretend to catch you. In the end, no one gets hurt. Clear?" Ruth swallowed hard, not grasping the full gravity of what Sophie was asking. She needed warmth, food, and rest. The money, though little, was more than she had. So, she bowed her head, accepting without protest. Sophie gave her a small pat on the shoulder, as if congratulating her for a job well done. "And don't think about crossing me," Sophie added with a note of superiority. "In the end, you might end up with more than this." Marcus, meanwhile, was at the counter paying the bill, discussing Christmas desserts with the now relieved manager. Ruth watched him from afar, puzzled. His caring demeanor starkly contrasted Sophie's demanding attitude, leaving her confused. She stood there, unsure of which world she had stepped into, one of love and selflessness, or one of manipulation and deceit. Within minutes, both returned to the table. Sophie ended a phone call, flashing a sweet smile at Marcus. He suggested they take a cab and call it a night. Ruth remained quiet, watching the snow fall gently outside the fogged restaurant window. As the couple left, Sophie cast a final glance at Ruth. Her smile was strange, almost threatening, and she gave a subtle nod, reminding the young girl of their deal. A part of Ruth wanted to return the money immediately, but the icy wind rushing in as the doors opened reminded her this might be her only chance to survive the holidays. Clutching the bills, she watched Marcus flag a cab, calling Sophie to get in. She thought, "What am I doing with my life?" Her heart pounded with shame and fear. Alone, Ruth let out a long sigh. A waiter approached timidly to clear the plates. She thanked him softly for the help she had received. Soon the restaurant would empty entirely, and she'd need to find a place to spend the night. Casting one last glance, she saw Sophie's sly, almost menacing smile as she entered the cab. Ruth swallowed hard. That was far from a gesture of genuine compassion. The restaurant door closed. The taxi's meter ticked away, taking the couple back to the comfort of their lives, while Ruth had no idea where she would sleep. Gripping the money like a lifeline, she wondered if she should give it back, but her exhausted body reminded her it was still a harsh winter outside. She wasn't sure of anything anymore. All she knew was that she needed to find a path, and quickly. So, with little choice, she tucked herself into a corner, waiting for the manager to finish closing up. Perhaps she could stay a few more minutes inside, away from the cold, before braving the snow again. As she closed her eyes, Images of Sophie's calculated words and Marcus's kindness replayed in her mind. Even on a night meant to be magical, forces beyond her control seemed to be at play. What now? Ruth had no idea how this story would end. With a shiver, she realized that accepting that money had dragged her into a cruel game. Watching the street illuminated by festive lights, she felt her life was about to change. But whether for better or worse, she couldn't tell. All she could do now was keep breathing and wait for the consequences of her decision. Sophie flashes a duplicitous smile at Ruth while Marcus hails a cab. Ruth remains in the restaurant, clutching the money, feeling as though she's just stepped into something far bigger than she could have imagined. Ruth remained inside the restaurant for a few more minutes, savoring the last trace of warmth before the manager finally closed the doors. She was exhausted and hungry, but above all, she felt the strange weight of the cash now in her possession, at least in theory. In practice, every cent seemed to chain her to an agreement she barely understood. Sophie's cold smile still lingered in her mind, leaving her restless. When the manager gently waved to indicate it was time to leave, Ruth simply nodded, grabbed her worn-out coat, and stepped into the freezing night air. Outside, the snow blanketed the sidewalks, creating a white carpet so beautiful it painfully contrasted with the harsh reality she faced. The icy wind quickly made her hunch her shoulders, forcing her to keep moving. She had no idea where she would sleep, perhaps a crowded shelter or a dry corner beneath an awning. She wandered the nearly deserted streets, gazing at shop windows adorned with colorful lights, extravagant Christmas trees, and posters advertising special discounts. With each step, however, the money in her pocket felt heavier, as if reminding her that something unexpected lay ahead. The next day dawned with a pale, white-tinged light. Ruth awoke in front of a closed shop, having slept sitting up with her arms wrapped around her legs. The position left her with an unbearable numbness in her back. As she stood, she noticed a delivery truck parked nearby, ready to unload boxes. The driver glanced at her briefly but said nothing, as though she were invisible. Rubbing her hands together to warm them, Ruth remembered that she needed to speak to Sophie. Despite her fear, she wanted to return the money, or at least understand just how deeply she was entangled in this trap. She decided to return to the restaurant where it all happened the previous evening, but it wouldn't open until later. With no other option, she wandered nearby streets, hoping to run into Sophie or perhaps Marcus. She found neither. Hunger gnawed at her again, and though the cash in her pocket was enough to buy a simple meal, she hesitated to spend it. It didn't feel like hers, tainted by the circumstances under which it was given. The memory of Sophie's whispered words about kissing the groom in a public moment churned her stomach every time it surfaced. As she walked, she passed others struggling with poverty, recognizing faces from other sleepless nights. She avoided lingering too long in one spot, afraid Sophie might appear and demand explanations. Eventually, she stopped in front of a convenience store with a large mirror in the window, decorated with painted snowflakes. The reflection staring back at her was of a girl with a haggard expression, disheveled hair, and sunken eyes resisting exhaustion. She didn't recognize herself. "How much longer can I keep going like this?" she thought, disheartened. Later, a van drove by, displaying a jewelry advertisement on its side. The image of dazzling rings and the tagline about the perfect gift for your loved one triggered something in her mind. If Sophie and Marcus were planning to purchase an even more extravagant ring, where might they be? Unsure, Ruth walked toward the city's upscale area, lined with high-end boutiques and department stores. Here, it wasn't unusual to see couples making last-minute Christmas purchases. A jewelry store's display caught her attention, showcasing sparkling diamonds in radiant tones. Inside the store, the atmosphere gleamed, almost blindingly bright. And there they were, Sophie and Marcus, examining an array of rings presented on velvet trays. Ruth froze outside, unable to muster the courage to enter. Pressing her face against the glass, she saw Sophie gesturing with dissatisfaction, likely deeming the options insufficiently luxurious. Her lips formed words Ruth could read. "I expected something more splendid, nothing mediocre, especially not for Christmas." The sales attendant seemed anxious to please her. Marcus, standing beside her, offered a strained smile, visibly uncomfortable. Ruth's heart raced. She considered stepping inside to return the money but hesitated, not wanting to cause a scene. Instead, she lingered nearby, hoping for a chance to speak to Sophie alone. From a distance, she observed the pair leave the store and head to another one just around the corner. The pattern repeated: Sophie, perpetually dissatisfied; Marcus, increasingly uneasy. Ruth managed to inch closer, overhearing Sophie exclaim, "It's Christmas! We deserve the best ring, don't you think? Don't you want me to be happy?" Marcus nodded silently, though his face betrayed the financial strain he was feeling. Ruth's mind flashed back to the night he had kindly saved her from humiliation at the restaurant. She couldn't reconcile his compassion with Sophie's cold demand for more. Always more. Ruth felt herself sinking deeper into a web she couldn't unravel. Eventually, Sophie appeared pleased with an enormous diamond ring the jeweler displayed. The deal was sealed with a handshake. Ruth watched as Marcus signed paperwork, his expression filled with silent dread, likely calculating the new burden of debt. Shortly after, the couple left the store, and Ruth trailed them at a distance. They arrived at a local shopping mall's parking lot where Sophie bid him a quick farewell with a kiss on the cheek, already distracted by her own plans. "Go handle those banking details," she said curtly, heading off in another direction. Marcus obeyed, walking away. At that moment, Ruth decided to confront Sophie. She called out hesitantly, "Sophie, could I speak with you?" Sophie stopped abruptly, irritated by the public mention of her name. Recognizing Ruth, she gestured sharply for her to follow. She led her to a dimly lit alley behind an appliance store, hidden from the street. "What do you want now?" she snapped impatiently. "You know we can't be seen together." Ruth pulled the cash from her pocket, offering it back. Her voice trembled. "This doesn't belong to me. I can't keep it. I think it's better if I forget everything you asked me to do. I don't want any trouble." Sophie let out a dry laugh. "Do you really think it's that simple? You already accepted the money, didn't you? You're involved. I still need that favor. All you have to do is follow the plan and you'll profit. Or would you rather keep wandering the cold streets?" Ruth hesitated, her eyes filling with tears. The temptation to throw the cash on the ground and run was overwhelming, but memories of the biting cold and the judgmental stares she faced everywhere held her back. She needed food, shelter, to survive. If Sophie was determined to involve her, perhaps there was no easy way out. "What exactly do you need me to do?" she murmured anxiously. Sophie leaned closer, her expression coldly superior. "It's simple. There's going to be a big public Christmas event soon. When I raise my glass for a toast, you're going to step in and kiss Marcus, right in front of everyone. I'll act shocked, create a scene, and demand the ring back as compensation for my suffering. After that, you'll disappear." Ruth clutched her face in disbelief. It sounded horrible, but Sophie showed no hesitation. She even reminded Ruth that refusing could lead to accusations of theft or trespassing from the previous night. Desperation overcame her, and though she nearly broke down, she held back her tears. There seemed to be no escape. "Fine," she whispered, her throat burning. "But what if something goes wrong?" "You just need to do exactly what I tell you," Sophie said darkly. "Everything will be fine, or it won't. Your choice." She turned and walked away, leaving Ruth frozen. This was the moment to decide, and her lack of options spoke louder than reason. Slowly, Ruth tucked the cash back into her tattered coat, the moral weight of her decision bearing down on her. As night fell once more, Ruth wandered aimlessly through the city's festive streets, enveloped by the glow of Christmas lights and the sounds of carolers. She felt utterly alone, the celebration around her a stark reminder of what she lacked. Squeezing the crumpled cash in her hands, she braced herself for the inevitable. The plan was set in motion, and each step forward felt heavier than the last. The day began with a biting wind cutting across Ruth's face. She awoke in the same corner where she had sought shelter from the nighttime snow, curled up beneath a narrow awning. Her worn-out coat barely kept the cold at bay, and her lips were tinged with purple. As she opened her eyes, memories came flooding back. The purchase of the expensive ring, Sophie's cunning scheme, and the need to feign a public kiss she never wanted. It felt like a stone was weighing on her chest, but she knew she had to get up. Gathering what little she had, Ruth made her way to a busy corner where commuters often passed on their way to work. With an empty stomach, every step was an ordeal. As the first light of the sun illuminated the city, she noticed the freshly fallen snow already beginning to pile up along the walls. She would have to endure that cold for most of the day. She glanced upward, silently hoping for no more snow. Elsewhere in the city, Sophie spoke on the phone with an almost calculated calm. She shuffled through old jewelry store receipts she had kept and focused intently as she confirmed the details of some transaction. Anyone watching her might notice her sly smile, as if everything was going according to a meticulous plan. She had just hung up when she saw Marcus approaching, his face marked with worry, as though he carried an ever-growing burden. "Who were you talking to?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "I was checking to see if our ring will be ready in time. You know, I want everything to be perfect," she replied, her sharp smile unwavering. Marcus nodded in acknowledgement, but he couldn't hide the unease building within him. Agreeing to splurge on a more luxurious ring had seemed like a good idea at the time, but he hadn't anticipated the financial strain it would bring. He had paid part of the cost and promised to cover the rest in the coming days. Anxiety gnawed at him, but he insisted to himself that he was doing it for love and that Sophie deserved the best. Not far from there, Ruth entered a small, modest cafe, its aroma of freshly brewed coffee evoking a sense of warmth. She hesitated, counting her coins and debating whether to spend some of the money Sophie had given her to buy food. She knew every cent extended her chances of survival, yet the rumble of her empty stomach won out. She sat at a chair near the counter and ordered a simple coffee with milk and a plain roll. As she waited, she tried to organize her scattered thoughts. With each warm sip, she looked around, wondering how many of the patrons had a place to call home that night. She secretly envied those who could drink their coffee without worrying if it would be their only meal for the day. Her mind wandered back to Sophie's face and the threats she had made. Ruth knew she had to stay in line and follow the plan, but every fiber of her being told her it was wrong to harm someone who had shown her kindness. "But what can I do?" she thought. The coffee was gone all too soon. Ruth paid and stepped back into the bustling streets, shivering from a chill that wasn't just from the icy wind. Meanwhile, Sophie arranged discreet meetings with Ruth. Each time they spoke, the pressure increased. In one such meeting, in an isolated area far from the city center, Sophie gave more detailed instructions. She wanted Ruth to attend a grand Christmas event where she and Marcus would be present, a public ball or a charity gala. At the precise moment Sophie raised her glass for a toast, Ruth was to appear and cause the scandal she had orchestrated. Ruth listened silently, swallowing her discomfort. Every cell in her body screamed at her to run, but Sophie made it clear she knew how to find her, and ominously reminded her that patience has its limits. Ruth bit her lip and nodded, her words catching in her throat as she accepted more cash, just enough to get by for a few more days. With each meeting, Ruth noticed unsettling details. Once, Sophie handled receipts from other jewelry stores, all in different names. On one occasion, there was a mention of someone referred to as J, whose last name Ruth couldn't make out. Her suspicions grew. Sophie seemed to be living a double life, likely running similar schemes on other men. But without concrete evidence, what could she do? Marcus, oblivious to the brewing conspiracy, kept up with his daily routine as best as he could. He juggled work, the mounting payments for the extravagant ring, and preparations for Christmas. Still, he couldn't ignore Sophie's growing tension. Often she would step away to take phone calls, retreating to another room or a quiet hallway. When he asked if everything was okay, she gave vague answers, brushing him off with, "Just party stuff. You wouldn't understand." One day, as he walked through a quieter street, Marcus passed Ruth by chance. She saw him first and quickly averted her gaze, afraid of being recognized. Marcus thought she looked familiar but dismissed the thought and moved on. For a fleeting moment, Ruth wanted to call out to him, confess everything, and beg forgiveness for what she was about to do. But Sophie's threats echoed in her mind, and she refused to appear as a beggar in Marcus's eyes. The following day, Sophie arranged another meeting with Ruth, this time in a discreet cafe on the outskirts of town. Ruth arrived to find Sophie waiting at a secluded table in the back. The conversation was tense from the start. Sophie, locking eyes with Ruth, gripped her arm tightly. "We're close to the event. You know what to do," she said. Yes," Ruth stammered, wincing from the pain in her arm. "But when exactly will this happen?" "Stay ready. It could be any time. Just watch for my signal when I raise the glass." Ruth swallowed hard. Sophie demanded to know where she was staying. Homeless and without a fixed address, Ruth described the streets and alleys where she usually slept. It was enough for Sophie to keep tabs on her. That afternoon, Marcus reviewed his finances again. The cost of the ring, combined with mounting interest rates, weighed heavily on him. He closed his eyes, questioning whether it was worth such a lavish expense just to satisfy Sophie's whims. Still, he couldn't forget her reaction to the previous ring, dismissing it as insufficient. "She's my fiancée. I have to give her the best," he reassured himself, trying to justify the madness. At dusk, Ruth sat on a sidewalk step, her legs aching from endless walking. As she sighed in exhaustion, a slip of paper fluttered out from under a nearby gate. It was an anonymous note, scrawled in hurried handwriting. "Beware of the next kiss. It could be your downfall." A chill ran down her spine. She had no idea who might have written it, but it was clear that someone knew about the plan or suspected something. Fear mingled with her growing anxiety, and Ruth resolved to dig deeper into what was truly going on. In a subsequent meeting, Sophie's tone turned harsher. She cornered Ruth in an alley between office buildings, issuing an ultimatum. She threatened to incriminate Ruth for theft or loitering if she didn't cooperate. Paralyzed by fear and aware of her lack of options, Ruth capitulated, her tears drying instantly in the freezing air as Sophie's grip left her arm throbbing. Later that night, Ruth sought refuge in the back of an abandoned building. Among old boxes and discarded cardboard, she found a quiet corner to rest. While rearranging the clutter, she stumbled upon a strange stack of papers on a makeshift table. Using the dim light from an old phone she had borrowed, she examined the documents. It was an old jewelry catalog, with several rings circled in red ink and dates scribbled beside them. To her shock, the dates didn't align with Sophie and Marcus's relationship. They appeared to predate it, hinting at past schemes involving other victims. Ruth's chest tightened as she realized this was far more than a spur-of-the-moment con. Ruth discovers on the table an old jewelry catalog with various rings marked and dates that don't match Sophie and Marcus's timeline. She realizes this scheme runs deeper than she ever imagined. The grand Christmas event had finally arrived, and everyone seemed eager for something extraordinary. Since early morning, the streets near the hall where the celebration would take place were adorned with colorful lights and decorations that sparkled even more thanks to the snow persistently covering the sidewalks. A children's choir sang on the stairs, voices united in melodies about hope and brotherhood. Even from outside, it was clear this night would be special. Marcus wore a dark suit, simple but well-fitted. His thoughts wandered far, worried about how to handle his proposal in front of so many people. He'd had a knot in his stomach since dawn, fearing something might go wrong. He carried the newly acquired ring, more expensive than the first, nestled in a velvet red box. With every step, he checked that everything was in place. The decorations, the music, the guest list. Everything needed to be perfect for Sophie. Inside the hall, organizers rushed about, finalizing the details. A grand Christmas tree stood in the center, decorated with ribbons and golden ornaments. On the tables, crystal glasses and festive napkins added to the cheerful atmosphere. A makeshift stage had been set up at the back, with microphones and sound equipment. A band tuned their instruments, preparing to play traditional songs to make the evening even more magical. Sophie arrived in her car, dressed in an elegant winter gown, her flawless hair styled into a sophisticated updo. Her gaze was confident, as if she had everything planned. As soon as she entered the hall, she began greeting guests with a radiant smile, the kind that captivates with its self-assurance. It was as though she were already the star of the night, even before any official announcements. Ruth, on the other hand, lingered outside, observing the commotion. She felt completely out of place amidst so much elegance. Her worn coat contrasted starkly with the luxurious attire of the guests, who arrived in expensive cars and impeccable outfits. She was acutely aware that she wasn't invited to the party itself, but to create a scene she wished she could avoid. With each passing minute, the music inside grew livelier, and the conversations reached the level of excitement typical of grand events. Ruth took a deep breath, remembering her instructions. At the moment Sophie raised her glass for the toast, she was to approach Marcus and, without any ceremony, kiss him in front of everyone. That would leave Sophie deeply offended and cause a scandal. Once it was done, Sophie would demand the ring back, breaking off the engagement. Unaware of the scheme, Marcus approached the stage with a microphone in hand. The band stopped playing. A slight hush of anticipation fell over the crowd. Clearing his throat, he announced it was a special moment to thank everyone for being there that night. He enthusiastically reminded them that Christmas symbolizes unity, love, and new beginnings. He ended his speech by encouraging everyone to enjoy themselves to the fullest, as the night would be unforgettable. No one suspected the whirlwind approaching. Meanwhile, Sophie moved through the hall, smiling at some, chatting with others. She seemed so charismatic that no one suspected what lay behind that smile. At one point, she turned toward Ruth, who stood near the entrance. She made a subtle hand gesture, a sort of silent warning for the young woman to prepare herself. Ruth's heart raced as she found a corner where she could wait for the signal. Guests began gathering to dance, glasses clinked in constant toasts, and the lively conversations mingled with the band's arrangements. Marcus took the opportunity to gather a few friends and share his secret. He had prepared a surprise for Sophie, something that would mark their lives. Beaming, he shared that in that very hall, he planned to propose to his beloved with everyone he cared about present. Shortly after, Sophie stepped onto the stage, climbing 2 steps and calling for attention. The band paused once again. All heads turned to her. Holding a microphone, she delivered a brief speech about the true meaning of Christmas, interweaving her words with phrases that extolled love and the bond of a couple. In the audience, Marcus watched, mesmerized, feeling increasingly confident about his impending proposal. When her speech ended, Sophie raised her champagne glass for a toast. That was the agreed-upon signal. Hidden behind some guests, Ruth took a deep breath, wishing she were anywhere else in the world. But she knew backing out now wasn't an option. Closing her eyes for a moment, she pushed through her fear and moved through the crowd until she reached Marcus. He was reaching for the ring in his suit pocket, preparing to kneel before Sophie, but just as he steadied himself on one knee, he felt a tug on his arm. Turning around, he was taken aback by Ruth, who planted a quick but intense kiss on his cheek. Stunned, Marcus didn't react immediately, and the room seemed to freeze for a few seconds. A murmur began to ripple through the crowd as Sophie feigned an immediate outburst. "What is this? What's going on?" She descended the stage quickly, her face contorted as if discovering a terrible betrayal. Some people filmed the scene on their phones, unable to believe what they were witnessing. The proposal was turning into an awkward, completely unexpected situation for most. Marcus tried to stammer out an explanation, but Sophie interrupted him with a voice dripping with feigned anguish. "I can't believe it. I thought you loved me, Marcus. I saw you kissing another woman during our big toast." He opened his mouth to defend himself, but, overwhelmed, couldn't comprehend why Ruth had done this. All he could see were her frightened eyes, silently apologizing. Sophie wasted no time and began crying loudly, demanding reparation in front of the shocked witnesses. She declared she wouldn't stay with someone who humiliated her like that. She announced she would break off the engagement and, as compensation, deserved to keep the diamond ring Marcus carried. After all, she wasn't to blame for him being such a scoundrel. The voices in the hall blended together. Some tried to comfort Sophie, others approached Marcus to understand the situation. Some whispered that Ruth was just an opportunist, while others suggested the scene seemed too strange to be true. A portion of the guests pulled out their phones to record the moment, ensuring not to miss a single detail. Ruth stepped back, inwardly mortified but also intimidated by Sophie's furious glare. Turning to leave, she tripped over a decorative pillar. At that moment, everything descended into chaos. Sophie and Marcus argued, waiters rushed to clean up broken glasses, a man tripped over the sound cables, causing a metallic screech through the speakers. Someone accidentally hit the microphone, creating a loud feedback noise that startled everyone. Marcus writhed in frustration, trying to explain himself to Sophie while searching his pockets for the ring, only to realize it was missing. The guests seemed more curious than helpful. Ruth, unable to process her feelings, sought an exit from the hall, desperate to escape the turmoil she had unintentionally helped create. Her pulse pounded in her ears, her heart racing as voices called her every name imaginable. In the midst of the commotion, silverware clattered, chairs were dragged, and a trail of confusion unfolded. And it was in this chaos that something fell onto the shiny floor of the hall. The small velvet box lay open, empty. Amidst the disorder, no one seemed to notice, but the ring was gone. In the middle of the confusion, the ring disappears. Ruth unwittingly ends up taking it, or it falls into her old bag. Sophie is shocked upon realizing she doesn't have her prize in hand. Marcus left the venue so stunned that he barely noticed the biting cold wind cutting through his skin. The Christmas lights on the street pulsed in a rhythm that seemed to mock his embarrassment. Just moments ago, his plan to propose to Sophie had crumbled in the wake of an unexpected kiss, followed by an explosion of accusations and an engagement abruptly ended at a public event. Now, all that remained was an overwhelming emptiness. He leaned against a side wall, trying to catch his breath. His head felt heavy as he replayed every second of the scandal. The toast, Ruth's sudden appearance, Sophie's tearful rage demanding the diamond ring as compensation for the alleged betrayal. But the kiss itself wasn't even the worst part. It was the confusion over why Ruth had done it, when all he'd ever shown her was kindness. A few friends and family members approached to comfort him, but he only wanted to be alone. He dismissed them with a wave, unsure of what to say. He needed to process the abrupt collapse of his plans. The ring was gone. Sophie had accused him of infidelity, and his reputation was now in question. He pulled his coat tighter around his neck, sinking into its warmth as snowflakes began falling once again. Inside the venue, Sophie wasn't faring much better. She paced like a caged animal, interrogating security about the missing ring. In her mind, the least she deserved after everything was that valuable jewel. She threatened anyone who might have seen something, promising rewards for whoever returned the diamond. The worried faces around her only fueled her fury. Some guests had already left in shock, whispering about the disgraceful scene. Others lingered, eager to see how it all unfolded. "Did anyone see that homeless girl?" Sophie shouted angrily at a guard. "She must have run off with the ring." The man shrugged, unsure. The chaos had been so intense that no one noticed whether Ruth had left with anything. Some doubted the ring had even been real. It all happened so quickly. Frustrated, Sophie pulled out her phone, calling acquaintances to accuse Ruth of theft and demanding they track her down. Meanwhile, Ruth ran aimlessly through the streets, her tattered coat flapping in the wind. She only realized something heavy in her bag when she turned a corner. Reaching in, her hand brushed against a smooth, unfamiliar object. She opened the bag to find the dazzling diamond gleaming up at her. Her eyes widened in shock as she tried to piece together how it had ended up with her. She didn't remember stealing or even intentionally taking it. It must have happened amidst the chaos. Her first instinct was to return it. But how? If she went back to the venue, she risked being arrested or humiliated, especially after Sophie's dramatic accusations. What if the security guards assumed she had acted in bad faith? At the same time, she remembered how kind Marcus had been to her. He didn't deserve to lose the ring, or the money it cost, because of a dirty scheme she'd been coerced into joining. Standing in a dimly lit alley, Ruth examined the diamond, its brilliance overwhelming her. It was a fortune compared to her life of hunger and cold. A pang of guilt hit her as she thought about agreeing to Sophie's plan. The entire scene had been a malicious setup to ruin Marcus, and now she was stuck in the fallout, potentially facing dire consequences if accused of theft. Not far away, Sophie stormed out of the venue in desperation. She hadn't gotten what she wanted, and worse, someone had stolen her prize. After a few calls, she learned Ruth had been seen fleeing nearby. Sophie knew Ruth had nowhere to go. She was homeless and penniless. That thought only intensified Sophie's fury. How could she lose the ring to a girl from the streets? Hours later, Marcus arrived home, dejected. He dismissed everyone's attempts to console him and ignored calls from friends and family. Sitting on his bed, he stared at the wall, his breathing labored. Why had Ruth kissed him? And why had Sophie reacted so theatrically? Something didn't add up. He had no idea where the ring was, but suspected Ruth might have it. Torn between feelings of betrayal and doubt, he struggled to understand the intentions of both women. As Sophie prowled the streets in her car, shouting Ruth's name into the snowy night, she looked like a deranged figure to anyone watching from afar. Finally, as dawn approached, she gave up and returned to her apartment, where she spent a sleepless night plotting her next move. Ruth, clutching the ring in her bag, sought refuge in an abandoned two-story building where a few other homeless people were sheltering from the cold. She found a corner to sit in, shivering from both the chill and her nerves. She didn't dare take the ring out again but couldn't ignore its presence. It was too valuable to keep, but too dangerous to return without being accused of theft. The next morning, Ruth counted the few coins she had left. She needed food to keep from fainting. Tucking the ring deep into her coat, she headed to a modest bakery and bought a small loaf of bread and a coffee. As she ate, she wrestled with how to return the ring to Marcus. It was the right thing to do, but she didn't even know how to contact him. What if Sophie answered the call instead? Could she leave it anonymously, and how could she ensure it reached the right hands? Her thoughts swirled, weighed down by the memory of Sophie's cruelty and determination. Later that day, Sophie found her. Furious, she blocked Ruth's path in a narrow street before Ruth could escape. Insults and threats rained down. "Where's my ring? Give it back now or I'm calling the police." The ring isn't yours," Ruth stammered, her voice barely audible. "Marcus bought it, right?" Sophie stepped closer, grabbing Ruth's arm tightly, nearly causing her to fall. "I don't care who paid for it. The ring is mine now, and I'll do whatever it takes to get it back." Ruth tried to explain she didn't have it, but her trembling gave her away. She knew Sophie wouldn't stop until she got what she wanted. Panicking, Ruth yanked her arm free and shoved Sophie aside, bolting down a narrow alley. She ran until her lungs burned, finally stopping to catch her breath, her heart racing. She noticed a scratch on her arm, blood staining her sleeve. She had escaped, but for how long? Far from the chaos, Marcus remained lost in thought. His friends urged him to move on, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Part of him suspected Sophie but struggled to accept that the woman he loved might have orchestrated such a scheme. Yet he also had no way to track Ruth, not knowing her last name or where she might be. Alone in his room, Marcus scrolled through photos of Sophie on his phone, searching for clues. He found inconsistencies in her stories and called a mutual friend, but no one was willing to speak against her. With a heavy sigh, he realized this might only be the beginning of uncovering a much larger truth. In her makeshift shelter, Ruth held the ring, conflicted. She thought of Marcus's kindness, his warm voice as he defended her that night. Guilt gnawed at her. She couldn't stay complicit in a scheme that was tearing apart someone who had shown her compassion. Ruth stared at the sparkling ring in her hand and whispered, "I need to return this to its rightful owner before it's too late." Ruth awoke from a restless sleep, the ring still tucked away in the inner pocket of her worn-out coat. She had spent the night huddled in an abandoned storage room, shielding herself from the biting wind that whipped through the streets. Her mind had been tumultuous during the night, replaying every detail of the scandal at the event. The kiss she hadn't wanted to give, the loss of the ring amidst the chaos, and the fight with Sophie. Now she woke with the heavy realization that she needed to make a definitive decision. As she stepped into the street, her stomach twisted with hunger. She had only a few coins to her name, but in her possession was something of immeasurable value. A ring with a diamond so large it sparkled even in dim light. She thought of how kind Marcus had been to her, and guilt burned in her chest like a hot coal. She knew returning the ring was the right thing to do, but she had no idea how to find him. Walking along the snow-covered sidewalks, she realized she would need a plan, or at least more clues about the ring's origins. Her first instinct was to return to the jeweler where the ring had been purchased, but she wasn't sure which one it was. She vaguely remembered seeing Marcus and Sophie visit more than one upscale establishment. Nonetheless, she decided to try her luck in the city's most affluent area, where glittering displays and sharply dressed security guards stood watch. Hunger urged her to act quickly. If she didn't eat soon, she risked collapsing in the street. She walked slowly, the wind cutting across her face, until she came upon a brightly lit sign that read, "Royal Jewels." The interior lights illuminated meticulously arranged displays, and she immediately recognized the style of the extravagant rings she had seen from afar when Marcus and Sophie visited. Before entering, she adjusted her coat, trying to disguise the shabby state of her clothing. Her heart raced, fearing she would be turned away at the door. The warm air hit her as she entered, and she was met with a wary glance from a middle-aged salesman in a tailored suit. He noted the stark contrast between his usual clientele and the disheveled figure standing before him. Still, he addressed her with formal politeness. "Good afternoon. How can I assist you?" Ruth cleared her throat, trying to mask her unease. I need some information about a ring. It's either white gold or platinum, with a large diamond. Could you tell me how much something like that might be worth?" The salesman looked her up and down, suspicion flickering in his eyes, but he replied in a detached tone. "That depends on the type of diamond, its carat weight, and the craftsmanship. Do you have a reference?" Ruth hesitated, unsure if she should reveal the ring. Finally, she decided to show it, though she kept her palm partially closed. Even so, the man's eyes widened at the size of the stone. "Good heavens! Where did you come by this?" She quickly closed her hand again. I found it. I don't have any paperwork. I just wanted to know if there's a way to trace the owner. Maybe some kind of purchase record." The man sighed, his patience visibly thinning. "Without documentation, it's tricky, but I could appraise it if you let me take a closer look." Fearful of being reported, Ruth reluctantly handed over the ring, her spine tingling with anxiety. The salesman examined it with a magnifying loupe, tilting it toward the light. After a moment, he nodded, confirming her suspicions. "It's a genuine diamond, and quite a large one at that. The craftsmanship is excellent, likely a custom order. If this is authentic, we're talking about a small fortune." She swallowed hard, her suspicions confirmed. The salesman handed back the ring, though she noticed the glint of avarice in his eyes, as if appraising a rare treasure. "If you're looking to sell, we could discuss a price, but without proper documentation it would require signing papers to declare the piece isn't stolen." Ruth swiftly pocketed the ring. "I'm not looking to sell it. I just needed to know its value and if there's a way to find its owner." He shrugged. "The only way to be certain is if the buyer came in with their receipt. It might be registered at another jeweler, but I can't verify that. And frankly, someone in your situation wouldn't typically possess something like this." Feeling humiliated, Ruth muttered a quick goodbye and stepped back into the freezing street. Now she was even more anxious, clutching a possession worth far more than she had ever imagined. She had to find a way to return it to its rightful owner. But how? Her hunger and exhaustion pressed down on her. In desperation, she remembered hearing about places that bought small valuables or even hair for quick cash. She didn't own anything of worth, but her thick, long hair, despite its unkempt state, had occasionally drawn compliments. She had heard of a salon specializing in extensions that purchased hair for minimal sums. Resolute, she made her way to a less glamorous part of town, where storefronts were sparse and unassuming. She found a sign reading, "Hair Salon, We Buy Hair," and stepped inside with a heavy heart. The sleepy-looking attendant gave her a curious glance. I want to sell my hair," Ruth said, her voice hesitant. The attendant nodded, calling over another staff member. Before long, Ruth was seated in front of a mirror, staring at her dull, waist-length locks. She thought back to her younger days when she had dreamed of having enough money to care for her hair properly. Now, parting with it was her only way to get a little cash. Enough, perhaps, to print flyers or take a bus to track down Marcus. "Are you sure about this?" the hairdresser asked, scissors in hand. Ruth took a deep breath, holding back tears. She nodded silently. The scissors began their work, cutting through the strands close to her scalp. She felt the weight of her hair fall away, and in just a few minutes, she was left with an uneven, cropped cut. The hairdresser weighed the bundle and handed her a small stack of bills. It wasn't much, but for Ruth, it was a lifeline. With the money, she bought a modest meal and a second-hand coat. Strengthened by the food and slightly warmer now, she was determined to find Marcus. If only she could return the ring, she could prove the truth, that Sophie had manipulated him. But as the day stretched on, her efforts to track him down yielded nothing but dead ends. Worse, she soon noticed two men following her through the streets, their bulky jackets and hard expressions betraying their intent. Ruth quickened her pace, turning into alleyways in an attempt to lose them. But one of the men cut her off, stepping in front of her against a graffiti-covered wall. "Where do you think you're going, miss?" he said with a sly grin. "Leave me alone," Ruth replied, her voice trembling. The second man appeared behind her, trapping her. They grabbed her coat, searching for the ring. Ruth struggled, kicking and screaming, but she was overpowered. "Hand over the ring, and we'll let you go," one of them hissed. Ruth's heart pounded as she clung to her pocket. She couldn't let Sophie win, nor could she lose the only proof of her innocence. A loud noise, a gate opening at the end of the alley, momentarily distracted the men. Seizing her chance, Ruth slipped free and dashed into the open gate. She climbed over a fence, cutting her leg as she landed on the other side. Adrenaline coursed through her as she limped away, her injured leg throbbing. She finally stopped in a secluded spot, clutching the ring tightly in her hand. Despite the pain, she whispered to herself, resolute, "I can't give up now. I'll prove that Marcus was deceived." Ruth walked with difficulty through the nearly deserted streets, pressing the torn sleeve of her coat against the wound on her leg. The bleeding had subsided, but the pain throbbed incessantly. The previous night had been a torment. She had slept poorly, and now was barely staying upright. With each step, her leg threatened to give out. Even so, her will to survive drove her forward. She needed to reach a safe place, somewhere she could plan how to prove she wasn't the thief everyone believed her to be. At the street corners, she noticed a few people, early risers heading to work, huddled in thick coats. Once, she bumped into an older man carrying grocery bags. He was startled by her appearance but quickly turned away without offering help. Ruth tried not to feel disheartened. She knew few people would trust a dirty, limping young woman who looked so vulnerable. A pang of anger flared, not at the man, but at Sophie, who had thrown her into this absurd situation. The first reports about the alleged theft of the ring had circulated even before dawn. On a small television inside a bakery, broadcasters discussed how a homeless young woman had been seen running with an expensive piece of jewelry on the night of the party. A few customers, sipping coffee and nibbling on bread, mentioned hearing descriptions of a black woman with short hair and tattered clothes, an exact match to Ruth. Hidden behind a dumpster outside the bakery, she overheard snippets of the broadcast. Fear coursed through her. Now she was a public suspect. She needed to be even more cautious. Not far away at Marcus's house, the atmosphere was tense. The sun had barely risen and 2 police cars were already parked outside his gate. Marcus opened the door, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. 2 officers greeted him formally, saying they had questions about the missing ring. One of them pulled out a notepad, ready to jot down every detail. "Mr. Marcus, is it true that the ring was yours?" the officer asked directly. Marcus confirmed, though his stomach churned. This was the hardest part, remembering how much he had spent for nothing. He explained that he had planned to propose to Sophie at the party, but things had spiraled out of control. He recounted, somewhat disjointedly, how the homeless woman had suddenly kissed him. He didn't mention his suspicion of a scam, as he had no concrete proof, just uneasy feelings. "And the young woman?" the officer pressed, scrutinizing him. "Did you know Ruth before?" He hesitated. "I saw her a few times, but we weren't close. I heard she needed help and tried to assist her, but I had no idea. Well, I didn't know it would end like this." The officers exchanged glances and got straight to the point. "Ms. Sophie was at the station this morning. She claims Ruth and you were having an affair. She also says Ruth is blackmailing you. Can you confirm this?" Marcus nearly choked in shock. How could Sophie tell such bold lies so convincingly? His face flushed, and his pulse quickened. "That's absurd," he replied, trying to stay calm. "I have no relationship with Ruth. I only tried to help her once. Sophie, honestly, she's exaggerating." One officer noticed the change in his tone but said nothing. They continued taking notes, thanked him, and advised him to call the station if he remembered anything else. They left, leaving him with a storm of doubts. He closed the door, leaned against it, and took a deep breath. His thoughts raced. Sophie had gone to the police, delivering dramatic statements to portray herself as the victim. He didn't want to believe she could have orchestrated this from the beginning, but the evidence was mounting. Meanwhile, Sophie left the station, speaking to an officer with a seemingly fragile demeanor. She cried, claiming she had been deceived and that Ruth was an opportunist who had been involved with Marcus before the proposal. The officer tried to console her, promising to do everything possible to capture the suspect. As Sophie left, a sly smile crept across her face. She walked to her car with a triumphant air, as though she controlled the entire narrative. Back at his house, Marcus received a visit from 2 friends who had been at the party. They brought shocking news. "We saw Sophie talking to Ruth earlier," one said, "in an alley near the jewelry store. It seemed strange, but we didn't think much of it at the time." "Yeah, a few days before the party," the other confirmed. "She seemed tense, almost like she was threatening Ruth. But honestly, we didn't get it." Marcus's jaw dropped. If Sophie had interacted with Ruth days before the incident, why was she now pretending not to know her? His mind reeled as he recalled small signs he had chosen to overlook. Sophie's unease when she saw Ruth at the restaurant, her furtive texting, her insistence on increasing the value of the ring. Suddenly, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place in an unsettling way. As Ruth wandered the streets in search of shelter, She narrowly avoided being spotted by these same friends of Marcus during a conversation at a street corner. She hid behind a parked car, eavesdropping as they said, "Marcus is starting to suspect Sophie staged the whole thing." She closed her eyes, feeling a brief sense of relief. At least he was beginning to understand the truth. Still, she was being hunted by the police, Sophie's henchmen, and anyone else looking to exploit the situation. Exhausted, Ruth remembered how it all began. That Christmas night when she had hidden under a table to escape the cold. She recalled the moment Sophie approached, feigning compassion but secretly blackmailing her to kiss Marcus in front of everyone. If she could go back, she would have refused the money and faced hunger and cold instead. But now, it was too late. Marcus, meanwhile, tried to piece everything together by talking to more people who knew Sophie. He heard vague rumors that, in another town, someone with a similar name had a fiancé who also lost a fortune in jewelry. Nothing was proven, but the accumulation of clues weighed heavily on him. How could he have been so naive? A growing sense of anger mingled with guilt. It was partly his fault Ruth had been dragged into this mess. Sophie, sensing Marcus's behavior shifting, doubled down on her victim act. She spread stories and lies, telling everyone she was heartbroken and that her dream of marriage had been shattered by his infidelity. She showed photos with teary eyes, playing the part of someone deeply hurt. Marcus received messages from acquaintances asking if it was true he had a secret affair. It infuriated him but also solidified his determination to uncover the truth. Ruth passed a concrete wall covered in graffiti and flyers. She spotted her own face, a poorly sketched but recognizable likeness, on one of the posters. The police had released a wanted notice, labeling her a suspect in the theft. The word "wanted" stood out below the image. She pulled her hood tighter, her cropped hair making her feel exposed. She needed a plan, and fast, or she would be arrested and never prove her innocence. Fear and frustration swelled as she noticed two security guards nearby, likely Sophie's henchmen. Surrounded by threats, posters, hired goons, police, Ruth considered a desperate move, going straight to Marcus's house to explain everything. But his neighborhood was well guarded, with police likely staking it out. Still, the idea of risking it grew more tempting. That evening, Marcus received an unexpected call. A soft, unfamiliar female voice whispered on the other end, warning him, "I know about Sophie's scam. She's done it before in another city. But you don't know me, and it's better if it stays that way. Look into unfiled complaints from jewelry stores. There are rumors." He tried to ask who she was, but the line went dead. Now he had leads suggesting Sophie might have pulled this scheme multiple times. He needed to gather evidence. Most importantly, he needed to find Ruth, the central piece in this tangled story. As he turned off his phone, his resolve sharpened. If the anonymous caller was right, Sophie had likely conned other men, acquiring expensive jewelry before disappearing in the wake of scandals. At the same time, Ruth narrowly escaped capture in an alley. The henchmen appeared so suddenly that she had to squeeze behind a stack of boxes. They shouted, "She won't escape this time!" Her heart pounded as they searched nearby. When they finally moved on, she fled as fast as her battered body allowed, running on the last reserves of her strength. Marcus confided in a trusted friend who worked as a police officer, sharing everything. Sophie's insistence on the luxurious ring, the orchestrated scandal, and his suspicion that Ruth had been coerced. The officer stroked his beard and asked, "Where's your proof that Ruth didn't steal the ring?" Marcus had none, only fragmented memories of the ball, statements from friends who saw Sophie with Ruth, and the anonymous call about Sophie's past scams. "I'll look into it," the officer said, "but without solid evidence it's just a he said, she said situation. Sophie can keep playing the victim and Ruth the criminal." Marcus nodded, frustrated. Thanking his friend, he left. But one thing was clear. He had to find Ruth. She might have the answers, or at least help him piece together what had really happened. When he returned home, he found Sophie waiting in the living room, arms crossed and eyes full of accusations. As he tried to approach her calmly, she bombarded him with demands for explanations. Where he had been, why he was avoiding the topic of the ring. Her defensive stance only confirmed his worst fears. Every time he sought the truth, Sophie countered with more lies. After a heated argument filled with Sophie's theatrical tears and pleas of innocence, Marcus grabbed his jacket and walked out. His heart compelled him to find Ruth, wherever she might be. There was no longer any point in defending himself against Sophie's accusations or trying to reason with her. He needed to hear the truth directly from Ruth, why she had done what she did, how she had been coerced, and what had actually happened to the ring. Sophie, seeing him take the car keys, saw it as a personal affront and tried to stop him. But Marcus was resolute. Marcus decides to go after Ruth to hear her side of the story. He grabs his car keys and rushes out, leaving Sophie fuming as she watches him leave without any explanation. Marcus drove through the streets for what felt like an eternity, his face tense, hands gripping the steering wheel. He tried not to lose hope of finding Ruth. He had no idea where she might be hiding, only guessing that she could be seeking shelter in makeshift spots or retreating to the city's more deserted areas, away from prying eyes. He combed through alleys, stopped at deserted traffic lights, and scrutinized every figure huddled against walls in the cold night. At one point, his heart raced when he saw a female silhouette near a dumpster. He slowed down, but as the headlights illuminated the figure, he realized it wasn't Ruth. Disappointed, he sighed and drove on, glancing at the clock on the car's dashboard. Time was slipping away, the night deepened, and with every moment that passed without a lead, his tension mounted. In his chest, urgency mixed with regret. Regret for ignoring the signs that Sophie had been planning something. Near a corner by an abandoned metro station, Marcus spotted a small group of homeless people warming themselves around an improvised fire in a barrel. He parked at a safe distance and approached on foot, his steps crunching on the accumulated snow. He tried to appear friendly, though exhaustion was evident on his face. "Good evening. Sorry to bother you. I'm looking for someone, a young woman named Ruth. He hesitated, unsure how to describe her, but tried anyway. She's black, average height, has short hair." One of the men sitting by the fire looked at him with suspicion. "Maybe I've seen her, maybe not. Depends." Marcus's heart skipped a beat. He pulled some cash from his pocket and held it out to the man, who eyed it warily, assessing whether it was a trap or genuine. After a moment, the man gestured with his chin toward a nearby underground passage that had once been an entrance to the metro. "I think she went down there less than an hour ago. She was limping and looked scared of something." Marcus offered a brief thanks, pocketed the remaining cash, and hurried toward the dimly lit tunnel. The icy ground caused him to slip slightly as he ran. As he neared the entrance, a pungent smell of mold and dampness reached him. Carefully, he descended the concrete steps, his eyes adjusting to the near-total darkness. He heard hurried footsteps echoing faintly below. "Ruth!" he called out, his voice barely above a whisper that echoed against the walls. "Is that you?" To his surprise, a figure leaning against the wall shrank back further. Then, a timid voice responded, trembling. "Who's there?" Relief flooded Marcus's chest. It was her. He approached cautiously, worried about startling her or provoking a defensive reaction. She looked terrified, clutching her torn coat tightly and shivering from the cold. When she realized it was Marcus, her body tensed further, though she seemed incapable of fleeing. "Please don't run," he said, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. "I'm not here to accuse you of anything. I just want to understand what happened." Her lips tightened as she remembered everything she had been through and the shame of accepting Sophie's money for that staged kiss. Shame gnawed at her insides. But when she looked into Marcus's face, she didn't see judgment, only concern. "Do you believe me?" she murmured weakly. her voice hoarse. Marcus took a step closer, noticing that she was unsteady on her feet. He extended an arm to support her, but hesitated, afraid she might see it as a threat. Ruth, however, didn't flinch this time. She needed the balance to stay upright. "Let's go upstairs. It's safer out there than in this hole. I can take you somewhere to talk things over calmly." She glanced nervously toward the faint beam of light coming from the street, imagining that the police or Sophie's henchmen could be after her. But looking at Marcus, she saw sincerity. Trembling, she decided to trust him. She accepted his arm for support, and together they climbed out of the underground passage. Inside the car, Ruth noticed the slight warmth from the heater, which felt like an immense luxury. She let out a soft sigh of relief as the warm air touched her face. Instinctively, she curled up in the seat, watching as Marcus carefully navigated the streets, mindful of not attracting attention. Eventually, he parked in a quiet spot beside a commercial building whose lights were off at that hour. "Now, please," he began, turning to face her. "Tell me the truth, from the beginning." Ruth took a deep breath. Her conscience weighed heavily. She started her story with the night she had hidden in the restaurant, fleeing the cold, humiliation, and fear. She explained how Sophie approached her with a proposal that had seemed at the time her only chance to survive. She described the bribe to kiss Marcus in front of everyone at the Christmas event, staging a betrayal. With each sentence, she braced for judgment, but noticing that Marcus listened without interrupting, she continued. She recounted how the ring had fallen into her bag during the chaos, Sophie's threats, and her failed attempts to return the jewel. She shared how she sold her hair to gather some money to move around the city and try to find a way to reach him. She spoke of the terrifying chases by Sophie's men, who nearly caught her multiple times. Several times, she had to pause to catch her breath, tears streaming uncontrollably. Marcus, unsure how to console her, lightly placed a hand on her shoulder, careful not to make any sudden moves. "I swear I wanted to return it," she said, her voice breaking, "but every time I tried I was afraid of being arrested, thinking no one would believe my story, thinking everyone would see me as nothing but a thief." Marcus listened, his stomach in knots. His anger at having been deceived by Sophie mixed with genuine compassion. He remembered Ruth's sincerity when she had simply asked for warmth during their first encounter and realized it was impossible for her to have orchestrated this on her own. Everything pointed to her being used. "My God," he murmured, running his hands over his face. "I knew something was wrong. Sophie! She—" He trailed off, a lump in his throat. His mind replayed every odd behavior of his fiancée, or ex-fiancée. Her demands for more expensive rings, her victim act, the way she tried to isolate him from any scrutiny. His anger surged. Ruth pulled the ring from the inside pocket of her coat. Even in the dim light of the dashboard, the diamond sparkled brightly, a stark reminder of its exorbitant value. She extended it toward Marcus. "This belongs to you. I'm truly sorry." He took the ring, still processing everything he had heard. He couldn't decide whether to feel relieved to have it back or furious for having spent a fortune on what now felt like a symbol of Sophie's deceit. "You're not to blame for being manipulated," he said softly. "This is all on her. She deceived me and used you." Ruth wiped her face. She felt somewhat lighter after finally telling the truth, but still trembled, fearing the police or Sophie's men. Marcus, sensing her predicament, began thinking of ways to protect her. "If you go to the authorities now, with all the circumstantial evidence against you, things might go badly," he said aloud, thinking. "We need something solid to expose Sophie. Maybe witnesses, recordings." Ruth nodded, recalling the security cameras at the event venue. Perhaps they had captured Sophie handing her money or something incriminating. Or maybe a staff member had noticed the suspicious exchanges between them. "Do you think we could check if those recordings still exist?" she asked, looking at him hopefully. "We'll try. If we can get that footage and testimony from people who've already mentioned seeing Sophie with you, we might be able to prove it was all a setup." Marcus took a deep breath, regaining some of the resolve that had carried him through the night. He had to fix this mess, and, above all, ensure Ruth's safety. She had clearly taken significant risks. But Sophie wouldn't sit idly by. She was likely scouring the streets or pressuring the police to find Ruth and retrieve the ring. Marcus started the car again, checking the rearview mirror to ensure no one was following them. Then, he shifted into gear and drove away. They needed an isolated place to plan their next move. "I'll take you somewhere you can at least rest and treat that leg wound," he said, noticing the dried blood stain on her pants. "After that, we'll focus on gathering evidence." Ruth nodded in gratitude, her breathing labored. She closed her eyes briefly, feeling the warmth of the heater enveloping her not just physically but with the comfort of finally being believed. Before long, distant sirens broke the silence. Marcus glanced at her quickly but remained calm, turning down another street before the red and blue lights could come into view. His hands were slick with sweat on the steering wheel. Even though he was innocent, Ruth couldn't be discovered now, not with the risk of everything being twisted. She leaned back in the seat, visibly exhausted but relieved to be with someone willing to help her. Her eyes closed momentarily in a haze of fatigue. Marcus, noticing her resting, relaxed his shoulders slightly. He had to protect her and find a way to expose the truth. Eventually, the road stretched into emptiness, the dark illuminated only by the car's headlights. Ruth awoke from a brief nap, instinctively checking the empty pocket where the ring had been. Alarmed, she searched for it with her eyes. Marcus, understanding her distress, retrieved a small box from the console and showed her the ring gleaming under the dim light. "It's here. Don't worry." She sighed in relief, nodding. Marcus stared at the diamond for a few seconds, his brow furrowing as its brilliance now seemed repulsive. This is what nearly destroyed everything," he murmured, so softly that Ruth barely heard. He pressed harder on the gas pedal, navigating a stretch where snow was accumulating again. His actions carried an urgency, as if every minute mattered in escaping Sophie's reach and any new traps. They exchanged a glance, sharing a mutual determination to uncover the truth. Ruth pressed her hand to her leg wound, wincing in pain, and Marcus lightly touched her hand, signaling that they were in this together. The ring caught a faint glimmer in his hand, almost symbolizing the trap that had been dismantled, though much remained to be proven. "We'll find a safe place, then search for the footage," he repeated, almost to himself. "And once we have what we need, He paused, his anger seeping through despite his efforts to contain it. "We'll expose her, no matter what it takes." Marcus and Ruth spent the rest of that night in a small, hastily rented room in a place he vaguely knew from having helped a fellow musician find lodging there once before. It was far from luxurious. Peeling walls, a single bed with worn-out sheets, and a window barely capable of keeping out the cold. Still, it served as a safe haven, away from Sophie's watchful eyes and anyone else who might try to capture them. Ruth could hardly sleep, jolting awake at every passing car on the street. Her body carried the exhaustion of sleepless nights, compounded by the constant tension that kept her on edge. Deep down, she feared that at any moment the police would break down the door, or Sophie's henchmen would show up with threats in tow. Marcus, meanwhile, spent the night pondering how to retrieve the security footage from the venue where the scandal unfolded. They needed that evidence to substantiate at least part of their case. In the early morning, the two spoke in hushed tones. Marcus checked his phone, unsurprised to find desperate messages from Sophie and confused inquiries from friends. There were also several missed calls from unknown numbers, likely from the police. He decided to keep the phone on silent and avoid responding immediately. Discretion was key. "I think the venue must have an office where they store the video files," Marcus said, leaning against the wall as Ruth, seated on the only chair, tried to warm her hands with a cup of cheap tea. "And if they've already erased everything?" she asked, her eyes filled with worry. Sophie might have acted fast, right? It's possible, but we have to try, Marcus sighed. The party was recent. There's a good chance the cameras still have the footage, at least a few days' worth on autosave. She nodded silently, aware they had few options. Without that footage, they'd be left with scattered testimonies, and Sophie could continue spinning her narrative. Ruth recalled the venue manager, an older man who had seemed perplexed by the commotion on the event night. Perhaps he might help, though Sophie, with her charm, could have already swayed him to her version of events. A short while later, they left the modest room and drove off in Marcus's car, parking a few blocks away from the venue to avoid drawing attention. The morning was overcast, with a steady wind rattling the Christmas decorations still hanging from poles. Ruth pulled her hood up, cautious not to be recognized as the thief who had allegedly stolen the ring. They approached the building via a side street. The venue looked vastly different from the festive night. No music, no guests, just a few employees cleaning up for the end of the year. Through the glass door they spotted dim lighting and an otherwise quiet scene. Gaining entry was easy, as the main door remained open for administrative matters or rental inquiries. "Let me talk to the manager," Marcus said, heading toward an unmanned reception desk. "You stay hidden, or at least try not to draw attention." Ruth agreed, keeping her distance. She noticed a sign pointing to the office. If they were lucky, they might find the security computers or video files there. Walking slowly down an oddly empty hallway, she listened as Marcus called out behind the desk. Eventually, a receptionist appeared, her face lighting up in surprise upon recognizing him. "Marcus? I didn't think you'd come back here after, well, everything that happened." He forced a brief smile. "I need to speak with the manager. It's urgent." The receptionist hesitated before making a call to the back. Moments later, the manager appeared, his tired expression marked by dark circles, like someone burdened with days of trouble. His demeanor soured further upon seeing Marcus. "Do you have any idea the chaos that night caused us? The local press, the police, everyone wants answers." "I'm sorry," Marcus said earnestly, "but I need a favor. I need to see the security footage from that night." The manager's eyes widened as he furrowed his brow. "Others have already asked. Sophie came here with the police, claiming she needed the footage because she was wronged by someone named Ruth." Marcus's heart raced. Sophie had beaten them to it. Still, he tried to remain calm. "And did she get the footage?" "I gave what I could to the police. They made copies. I don't know if Sophie saw everything or took anything, but the originals are with the precinct now." Marcus sighed in frustration. This complicated matters. They'd have to request the footage from the police, an institution likely influenced by Sophie's narrative. Before he could respond, Ruth appeared, quietly stepping closer. The manager froze upon seeing her, taking a couple of steps back. "It's her, the one who caused the fight. What is she doing here?" Ruth raised her hands in a calming gesture. "Please, we just need to know if there's any original footage left that hasn't been copied or handed over. Anything that could show Sophie paying me before the commotion." The manager hesitated, visibly torn. He had witnessed something odd on the night Ruth acted. Sophie had spoken to him privately, demanding the tapes, but he hadn't reviewed everything himself. Deep down, he seemed to suspect there was more to the story. "There might be backups in the office upstairs, but the police already combed through it. I doubt there's anything significant left." Before they could press further, Sophie stormed down the hallway, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. 2 officers and a man dressed in lawyer-like attire followed closely. Her face gleamed with satisfaction upon seeing Marcus and Ruth. "I knew you'd show up here," she said, voice dripping with smugness. "Trying to destroy evidence, I suppose. But you're too late. The police have it all." Marcus clenched his fists, turning to face her. "We're here for the truth, Sophie. You orchestrated everything, bribed Ruth. Enough lies." Sophie let out a sharp, sarcastic laugh. "Unbelievable. Me? Bribe a homeless woman to ruin my engagement? What sense does that make? You're trying to pin your own mistakes on me?" The police officers stepped forward, their stern gazes fixed on Ruth and Marcus. Sophie had evidently persuaded them to believe her version of events. One officer raised his voice. "You two need to come with us for questioning. There's already a report filed against Ruth for theft." Ruth's heart pounded. If taken to the station without proper evidence, she'd be formally charged. Her eyes darted to Marcus, seeking reassurance. The manager stepped back, uncertain about intervening, while curious employees began gathering, eager to witness the scene. Sophie, sensing the growing audience, adjusted her fur coat and addressed them loudly. "There's nothing to debate. This woman crashed my party, destroyed my engagement, and stole my ring. What other explanation could there be?" Marcus raised his hand to speak, his voice firm. "I bought that ring, and I know Ruth didn't steal it. You planned everything to keep the jewelry. She told me everything." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some whispered, "Could Sophie have tricked everyone? Or maybe it's not that simple." The tension escalated. Sophie noticed her grip on the narrative slipping and turned to the lead officer, feigning desperation. "See, Captain? They're slandering me now. It's a conspiracy." A noise from a nearby office drew everyone's attention. The receptionist emerged with more employees, all eager to understand what was happening. Ruth felt a cold sweat break out. One misstep, and she'd be arrested without a chance to prove her innocence. Marcus tried to explain Ruth's presence. She came to return the ring. She never intended to keep it. There was confusion during the party. It ended up in her bag. The officer turned to Ruth, his expression critical. "Is that true? Where's the ring now?" Ruth glanced at Marcus, uncertain if it was the right time to reveal the jewel. Without solid evidence of Sophie's scheme, producing the ring could backfire. Sophie's triumphant smile widened as she sensed her advantage. Ruth began, her voice faltering. "Lies, all lies!" Sophie shouted, throwing her arms up theatrically. "I'm tired of this defamation. Can't you see, Captain? They're in this together." The venue manager cleared his throat, drawing attention. "If you want, we can check if there's still any footage in the office. The hallway cameras or parking lot might show something suspicious." That glimmer of hope lit up Marcus and Ruth's faces. Sophie, realizing the risk, quickly intervened. "There's nothing useful there. We already checked. It proves nothing." "Even so, I want to see," the officer declared, his authoritative tone cutting through the tension. "Let's verify what's left." The group moved toward the second-floor office, the air thick with tension. Sophie whispered hurriedly to her lawyer while Marcus and Ruth trailed behind, flanked by the second officer. Upon reaching the office, they found the door ajar. The manager rummaged through drawers and powered on an outdated computer. The room fell silent as everyone awaited the results. When the files finally opened, they found only generic clips and corrupted fragments. It seemed much of the data had been erased or relocated. Sophie's discreet smile returned as she crossed her arms. "I told you," she said, almost mockingly. "There's nothing incriminating here." The officer, visibly annoyed, slammed the laptop shut and turned to Marcus and Ruth, his gaze heavy with skepticism. Ruth felt a sinking dread. Without clear evidence, her fate seemed sealed. Suddenly, a security staffer burst into the room clutching a USB drive. "Sir, I found this at the security desk. It might be a backup no one noticed." Sophie's eyes widened slightly, betraying a flicker of unease. The staffer plugged the drive into the computer, and a short video played. It showed Sophie cornering Ruth in a secluded area during the event, handing her something that looked like money. The footage was grainy but suggested a possible bribe. "Turn that off! It's out of context!" Sophie shouted, her voice shrill. "I was only helping someone in need." The officer watched intently, his expression hardening. The clip wasn't definitive proof, but raised serious doubts about Sophie's claims that she'd never interacted with Ruth. The room buzzed with murmurs as employees exchanged glances. The manager, sensing relief, spoke up. "This was recorded just before the party started. If nothing else remains, this might be the key evidence. Sophie, realizing the tide was turning, stiffened. She feigned indignation, raising her voice to the officer in the crowd. "Arrest that thief right now," she demanded, pointing an accusatory finger at Ruth. Ruth, her hands raised in surrender, turned to Marcus with unwavering determination. "Trust me, I will prove everything." Ruth kept her hands raised, glancing alternately between the chief of police and Marcus. The small office of the salon remained steeped in tension, as if every breath was accounted for. Sophie stood beside the lawyer, restless, repeatedly insisting that the thief should be arrested immediately. The chief exchanged glances with another officer, uncertain if he had enough evidence to detain Ruth or if further investigation was necessary. The brief security video, showing Sophie handing money to Ruth, was inconclusive but undermined the narrative Sophie was trying to uphold. Marcus decided to intervene before the situation spiraled out of control. "Chief, please hear me out. I have a receipt for the ring, signed by me. I'm the one who bought it. Sophie has no right to claim that the ring ever belonged to her." All eyes turned to him. Sophie let out a forced laugh. "You gave me that ring, remember? It was an engagement gift, Marcus. Don't try to rewrite history." "He was going to give it to you," Ruth retorted, her voice still shaky but courageous enough to meet Sophie's piercing glare. "But he never got the chance to propose because you staged that entire betrayal." A murmur rose among the employees gathered at the doorway, all watching the drama unfold. The chief gestured for them to disperse, but it was futile. Curiosity kept the crowd rooted. A few even held up their phones, hoping to capture something. "One thing is clear, Chief," Marcus pressed. "Ruth didn't steal anything. This was all a setup to get the ring into Sophie's hands. She kept demanding more and more jewelry, and now it's clear her goal was to scam me." Suddenly, a second officer who had just arrived stepped forward and addressed the chief. "I need to show you something. I just got a call from a colleague in another city. They've been investigating similar scams involving a woman named," he checked his notepad, "Sophie, or sometimes D. Santos. There are records from jewelry stores, no formal charges yet, but plenty of similar complaints." Sophie's face went pale. She tried to feign shock, but the accusation was too damning to dismiss. "I have no idea what you're talking about. I have a clean record. This must be a mistake." The chief squinted, analyzing her reaction. While he lacked definitive proof linking Sophie to prior scams, the emerging pattern was compelling. The flash drive containing footage of her handing money to Ruth was also enough to charge her with making false statements, as she had spent the entire night claiming she had never seen Ruth before the kiss incident. "Why did you deny knowing Ruth when there's a video of you two talking?" the chief asked sternly. She opened her mouth, scrambling for an explanation. I was just giving her charity, trying to help. I had no idea what she was planning." "Then why accuse her of theft without mentioning you gave her money?" the other officer interjected, catching her in a contradiction. Sophie nervously ran her hand through her hair, seeking support from her lawyer. His furrowed brow said it all. He knew his client was entangled in contradictions too difficult to resolve. Meanwhile, Ruth gathered her courage, opened the bag slung across her body, and pulled out the ring, wrapped in a dirty cloth. Even from a distance, the diamond glimmered, causing a small commotion. She handed the bundle to the chief, addressing everyone. "I could have sold it, run away, but that's not what I want. I'm not a thief. This ring belongs to the man who bought it." Marcus exhaled deeply, overcome with gratitude and sadness. He took the ring from the chief, feeling the weight of the ordeal he had endured. "I bought this ring, thinking it symbolized true love. Instead, it brought nothing but heartbreak." The chief was unequivocal. "If you have the receipt proving you're the buyer, no one else can claim it." Sophie stepped forward, outraged. "But he gave it to me. It's mine by right. And I demanded compensation for the pain he caused me by betraying me in public." Marcus met her gaze with bitterness. "You fabricated the entire story of betrayal. There was no gift, no formal proposal. You only wanted the ring. She tried to counter, but the voices around her grew louder, recalling details, casting judgmental glances. The chief finally took a step back. Let's calm down. Ms. Sophie, I'll need you to come in for further questioning. It's best if everyone goes to the station. We'll review the documents, the flash drive, and the accusations of fraud and false reporting against the young lady. Sophie fumed, realizing the tide was turning against her. She glared at Ruth with barely concealed hatred, then at Marcus with disdain. But she had no choice but to comply as the officer watched her closely. You're all insane. I can't believe you'd trust this homeless woman over me. Marcus responded firmly. I'd rather trust someone with nothing who gives everything of themselves than someone with everything who offers nothing true. The words landed like a final verdict. Sophie huffed, about to retort, but the chief motioned for her to stop. They left under escort to formalize the investigation. As the crowd parted, Sophie stormed out, her heels echoing angrily through the salon's corridors, followed by the officers and her visibly defeated lawyer. When the door closed, only Marcus and Ruth remained, surrounded by a few curious onlookers, unsure whether to congratulate them or leave. The salon manager, still in the office, turned to them. I'm sorry for all this chaos. I hope you can resolve the rest at the station. But the truth seems to be coming out, doesn't it? Marcus nodded, slipping the ring into his pocket. He murmured his thanks, eager to leave the place that held such bitter memories. Ruth, for her part, felt her injured leg ache, still healing, but the weight of unjust accusations was beginning to lift. Outside, they walked side by side in silence. The snow blanketing the parking lot crunched underfoot, each step accompanied by the sound of their shoes. But the quiet between them was no longer filled with fear or distrust. It was one of mutual understanding. At the car, Ruth hesitated. Do you still want me to come with you to the station? I do. You need to tell your side of the story officially, but this time, we'll do it together. I'll back you up. She nodded, realizing that for the first time someone had said, we'll do it together, with no ulterior motive. They got into the car, and as he started the engine, Marcus glanced at the glove box where he had stored the ring box. He thought of all the financial sacrifices he had made, the suffering caused by misunderstanding, and now, the realization. The ring's value paled compared to the possibility of building something genuine. Some days later, the police station released a statement confirming Sophie was under investigation for attempted fraud and potential connections to other scams. The flash drive and Ruth's testimony were pivotal in clearing her name. Sophie's lawyer attempted to pin everything on Ruth, but the witnesses' accounts and Marcus's receipt for the ring supported their case. Finally, Ruth was free from the shadow of suspicion. Though her leg still throbbed with pain, she no longer had to live in hiding. Out of compassion and perhaps a burgeoning affection, Marcus offered her shelter in a small house he had inherited from his grandfather not far away. It was simple but warm, with a clean room and heating. There, Ruth could take a hot shower, change clothes, and rest with dignity. I don't know how to thank you, she said, uneasy, surveying the old-fashioned decor. You've already done so much for me. Marcus gave a soft smile. You've done more for me than you know. You showed me I was investing in the wrong person. I know it's early, but Christmas is coming, and I'd like you to stay. No one should spend the holidays out in the cold. She clasped her hands tightly, holding back tears. Memories of freezing nights and wondering if she'd survive another day flashed through her mind. Now she found herself in a safe space with someone who believed in her. She leaned back in her chair, breathing deeply as the heater filled the room with warmth. Over time, they shared more about themselves. Marcus confessed he had recently paid off some debts from purchasing the expensive ring but still had a small reserve. He admitted he wasn't wealthy but had enough to maintain the house and make modest renovations. Ruth, moved, promised to find an honest job, anything to avoid being a burden. The day before Christmas, Marcus took her shopping for clothes. She chose a simple sweater in soft tones and a coat warmer than any she'd ever owned. Seeing her reflection in the mirror, clean and presentable, nearly brought her to tears. With her short hair, she looked different, but the feeling of finally belonging somewhere lit up her face. On Christmas Eve, the tree Marcus had set up was modest, decorated with ornaments salvaged from the old attic, but it gleamed with a special charm. Ruth helped hang string lights he had bought on clearance. The scent of homemade food filled the house, a humble yet heartfelt feast. As Ruth finished setting the table, she paused to take in the scene. It felt surreal that only weeks ago she had been fleeing through the snow, unsure if she would survive. Without a word, Marcus retrieved the ring from the drawer. He stared at it for a moment, letting out a deep sigh. There would be no proposal to Sophie, no attachment to the costly diamond. Walking over to Ruth, who watched him curiously, he smiled gently. "I'm not giving you this as an engagement ring because I know it's not the right time. But I want you to know this ring no longer means anything beyond being a reminder that honesty is the rarest treasure there is." She returned his smile shyly, letting him tuck the ring away again. The diamond seemed dull compared to the light that passed between their eyes. "You've done so much for me," Ruth whispered, "and I had nothing to offer but the truth." Marcus took her hand. "That was enough to show me what's truly valuable." They sat down at the table together, the candlelight softly illuminating their faces. The modest meal before them tasted like a shared victory. After so much hardship, Ruth and Marcus had found a moment of peace. Though he couldn't predict what the future held, Marcus felt that this Christmas marked the beginning of something new and far more genuine than any ring could symbolize. As the distant sound of Christmas bells echoed through the quiet night, Marcus murmured, "The ring was valuable, but Ruth's sincere love is what truly makes me a rich man." If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Just click on the screen.